century, to leave the Earth was an impossible fantasy. Two great nations went head-to-head to prove this idea wrong.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
World War II had ended and the Cold War had started. This wasn't the only bitter exchange between countries. The Soviet Union and the United States were in a battle fighting for political and economic superiority. This would be known as the space race.
The Soviet Union was a leading communist power and was being led by Nikita Khrushchev. The United States was leading in the capitalist world and had John F. Kennedy as their president. The two countries fought through exploration, encounter, and exchange to be the most advanced in the space race. The space race was important in many different areas, but the category that stood out the most was the advancement it presented in space exploration. The Soviet Union was the first to take charge and explored space through satellite. Khrushchev launched the first artificial satellite into space on October 4, 1957. It was known as Sputnik 1. When Sputnik was launched, the United States decided that they could no longer compete with the Soviet Union via military means. Instead, they would have a race to see who could put a man on the moon first. The focus between transitioning between the Cold War and the space race was mainly based on missiles and how satellites are used. Satellites continue to play a key role in the progress of the space race for both sides. The more test runs a country conducted with these satellites, the further the progress went along, and with progress meant closer to putting the first man on the moon. When Sputnik was launched into orbit, it became visible all over the world. Radios blasted the groundbreaking news, sending fear throughout the United States and increasing the tension between the rivalries. This launch caused paranoia throughout the United States that Russia had conquered a step to putting a man on the moon.
The rivalry was almost described as enemies, certainly not allies, but as global superpowers.
The first rocket is then dropped, its fuel exhausted. A second rocket ignites and takes over. Altitude 140 miles, satellite being stripped for action. It's that round ball in the nose.
The first living thing was put into space by the Soviet Union. On November 3, 1957, Laika, a dog, was launched into orbit. Laika was launched using Sputnik 2, another artificial satellite. She stayed in orbit for 6 days, but later died due to overheating. Although the life of Laika was lost, the Soviet Union had proved that a living animal could be launched into orbit and endure microgravity.
The United States took their first step on January 31, 1958, when they launched the first U.S. satellite, Explorer 1, into space.
Roger. Okay, we'll start now. Any fuel loading? Okay. Check the utility room fuel vapors and notify the blockhouse when we're clear to start generators.
The USSR retaliated on September 14, 1959, the day that physical exploration of space became possible. Luna 2, a space probe launched by the Soviet Union, made its journey to the moon. This was groundbreaking. Prior to the space probe being launched, the only available means of exploration had been observation from Earth.
And scored a bull.
On April 12, 1961, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin suddenly became the first human to travel into space when he was launched into orbit on the Vostok 3Ka-3 spacecraft. The Soviet Union and the United States vigorously continued to compete to push the boundaries of mankind's exploration of space. When Gagarin launched into orbit, the Russians scored a victory, giving his 108-minute flight a permanent place in the history books as the first man in space.
Telstar, a collaboration between U.S., French, and British broadcasting agencies, was the world's first active communication satellite. It launched on top of Thor Delta rocket on July 10, 1962. It enabled TV programs to broadcast across the Atlantic, send television signals, telephone calls, and fax images throughout space. On June 16, 1963, the first woman was sent into space. The woman lucky enough to fly the Soviets' Vostok 6 and take a lead was Valentina Tereshkova. This was not only a step in exploration, but also created an exchange between men and women in the workplace because they had to work together for the mission to be successful.
The Soviet Union made another milestone when they took the chance of extravehicular activity in space. The Soviet manned space mission Vostok 2 was launched March 18, 1965. The two crew members manning the ship were Pavel Belyaev and Alexei Leonov. The mission completed 17 orbits, and Alexei Leonov became the first person to leave the spacecraft in a specialized spacesuit to conduct a 12-minute spacewalk.
Much to the Soviet Union's dismay, the United States held the triumph of the first human to step foot on the moon. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong took the most memorable footsteps in space history. Stepping off of the lunar landing module, Eagle, Armstrong stated a phrase that would be remembered forever.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
But the Soviet Union wouldn't let the lunar landing distract them from making other advancements in space. Instead, they created Salyut 1, the first space station, made important progress toward living and working in space long-term, and paved the way for future space stations. Launched by the Soviet Union on April 23, 1971, the port orbited the Earth almost 3,000 times during its 175 days in space before it was intentionally crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Although the first space station ended poorly, it set the stage for many stations that came after it. Mariner 9 was the first satellite to orbit another planet and was launched by the USA. It was in flight for a total of 167 days until reaching Mars on November 14, 1971. Due to a dust storm on the surface of this foreign planet, the probe was unable to take clear pictures of the surface at first, but in January of 1972 the dust lifted and a new planet was revealed. This was a major accomplishment for the United States, but the Soviets wouldn't be shot down that quickly.
The Soviet Union wanted to beat the United States in another mission. Both space programs, the USSR and NASA, prepared for 3 years to go on a mission. The mission took place on July 17, 1975, and it wasn't like any other. This mission set milestones for exploration, encounter, and exchange. An unlikely encounter happened when a United States Apollo spacecraft and the Soviet Soyuz 19 docked in space, and their crews met one another and exchanged a handshake. This was not only an exchange of respect, but also a congratulations for the steps made in exploration that were made by both programs. The two countries went into orbit together, and two crews practiced different maneuvers, carried out experiments together, and exchanged gifts. This was the end of the space race.
Stage 1 is landed. LZ-1, the Falcon is landed. Landing operators moving to procedure 11.100 section 3.
There has continued to be exploration since the joint mission. Rockets have been launched and probes have been created. The most successful exploration milestone since 1975 was when Falcon 9 was launched by Elon Musk on December 21, 2015. Falcon 9 left Earth and came back unharmed. This was the first successful Falcon, which never would have been possible if it wasn't for the space race.
The space race was beneficial for our scientific understanding and led to multiple technological advances historically. Although the technological and scientific war, known as the space race, officially ended on July 15, 1975, when the USA and USSR met in space, the advantages of the space race live on in today's modern technology.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
Not only was the space race just a battle between two countries, but it furthered the progress and enlightenment about space exploration all around the world. The space race did not only better one single country, but instead learning as a whole the advancements that could be made in space.